Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our course breakdown for this week's Farmers Insurance Open. Gonna get you ready for all of your exposure this week with a breakdown of both golf courses and what to expect to help you out with your research. And that includes some course details and analytics per bet the number, a whole by whole breakdown of all the shots required around the main track this week, as well as my custom modeling and comp courses that I'm using to identify my top plays. So by the end, you'll be a complete expert on what to expect this week. So without further ado, let's go ahead and hop on in. The main course is going to be the South course, and by far the more difficult of the two. In fact, it's going to be a much more different style of golf than what we've seen so far in 2026, and a scoring average that'll be towards the much harder end of the spectrum, and a lot of that has to do with the length. It is a 7,765 yard golf course, but also a lot more lush and deep rough than what we've been used to seeing so far this year. So your misses are going to be penalized. The greens are also tricky. They have a lot of undulation on them, and as long as it's not raining a whole bunch, they tend to be on the firmer end of the spectrum as well. So pretty much all parts of your game are going to be tested around the South course, and we're going to talk a lot about that throughout this video. But the agronomy is Poa Anua from tip to toe, pretty similar across both of these different tracks. You can see the ryegrass overseed, that is ryegrass overseeded on top of kikuya. Kikuya is an extremely penal grass, so although it's only 4 inches long, it plays even longer than that. And you've only got 5,000 square foot greens, a little bit smaller than your PGA Tour average. So when you're missing those fairways, which are extremely tight around this kind of golf course, you're gonna have a hard time holding those green complexes too. So it leads to a lot of bogeys. It's death by 1,000 paper cuts around this sort of venue. And if you do get out of position and then you try and be overly aggressive, double, triples, even quad bogeys come to play pretty quick around here. And that's despite there only being one hole with water in play, which is a lot different than some of the other tracks that we've seen. A lot of times the big misses were due to penalty drops or out of bounds, that sort of thing. That is not the case around the main course this week. The other track's gonna be the North course, the much easier out of the two. It is a 2 golf course setup, so no 54 hole cut like we had at the Amex. It will be after 36 holes, but players are only going to see the North course for 1 out of their 4 rounds. And when you get to the North course, you better be shooting something like -5 or better, because it's a lot shorter, only 7,258 yards. The greens are also a little bit larger at 6,000 square foot, and even though the rough is still super long, it's not nearly as challenging as you have at the other side. So that's where you're going to see some lower scores, people that can tend to be more aggressive. The par 5s are more reachable. You even have some par 4s that are just little pitch and putts, as opposed to the long brutes that you have at the championship style course. And at least for showdown purposes, rounds 1 and 2, this is where you obviously want your players to be. But because we're going to have the harder golf course in play for 3 of the 4 rounds, this is where our focus is going to be for most of our handicapping. And when we take a look at the analytics and details on the Bet the Number site, that's where a lot of these metrics are going to be coming from. So let's start off with a look at some of these distributions towards the bottom, which are almost all harder than your PGA Tour average. So your fairway rate is only about 52% at this course. So even though it is extremely penal to hit out of the rough, you're not going to hit very many of them because of how narrow they are. Your green regulation rate is lower than average at only 60.8%, and that is despite it having a stronger than average field. So that below average mark is even more impactful than normal. Your scrambling rate's super low at only 52.7%. That has to do with the rough and the difficulty of the greens. You can see the scoring average normally plays like 1.2 over par. That's about 1.75 shots harder than your PGA Tour average. A low birdie rate, your bogeys are higher than normal. Every single metric that we're looking at on this chart is going to be harder than your PGA Tour average. And like I said, death by 1,000 paper cuts is, I think, a really good way to put it. And if you take a look at some of the other metrics down here towards the bottom, you would think a long bomb fest like this would be all about your driving distance, and it's about rating about average in that category. So maybe a bit surprising for somebody like myself that thought it'd be a little bit more driving heavy. But when you take a look at this approach distribution, you can see there's a lot of shots from 125 plus, and especially from this 175 to 225 range, utilize a little bit more than your PGA Tour average. And the around the green profile is relatively balanced, I would say. You're going to get shots out of the bunkers, the rough, the fringe, the fairway around the green. This isn't the kind of golf course where it's all, shaved off fairway areas. It's also not this kind of golf course where it's all just rough around the green. So around the green distribution, I don't think we want to cater it towards one specific sort of player, but let's go hole by hole and show you the kind of shots required at the main track this week, because you can really get an idea for what's going to play well here. And the first hole is 451. It doesn't look like a brute, but if you miss the fairway here, the second shot's going to play over 200 yards with that rough, and it is a very small green complex. So you can see the reliance on ball striking around this venue. That's where a lot of my weights are going to be in my modeling this week, and around the green is going to come into play as well. So you've had the Patrick Reeds of the world find success that way by just around the greening the course to death, and then your Scotty Schefflers and more of your ball strikers striking first kind of players that also routinely finish in the top 5, top 10. And because you do have these small green complexes, and if they are going to be a little bit firmer this year than what we've had the last couple seasons, then I think apex height's going to come into play as well, as that's going to help you hold some of these greens, especially out of that rough. Next up, we have 2, which is 392. This is a shorter, quote-unquote, easier hole that you have at this course, but a lot of that comes down to pin. A back right pin looks a lot more exposed, but believe it or not, it's the hardest pin that you have at this hole because of the kind of sloping that you have at that portion. So I don't think looking at these overhead views is going to be quite as useful as normal, because the sloping on these greens has a lot to do with the hole difficulty, if not just as much as the wind and some of the ball striking effects do. Next up, we have 3, which is 201, a longer par 3. A lot of times this is shortened up because it plays into the wind, but if it is being played at its full distance, this will be one of the harder holes that you have on property. Extremely narrow green complex means that your distance control is going to be the main factor there, and with that wind, that's why it's so much more difficult. 4 is 489. This is a long par 4. Everything slopes from right to left, so if you hit it in the middle of the fairway, you might even end up on the rough on the left side, which means the bailout's towards the right, and if you hit it in these bunkers, you're talking about a 200-yard shot into an extremely small green, especially for a 200-plus yard iron shot. So a lot of fall-offs here, a little bit of a false front at the front as well, and these back left pin locations can be especially tricky if it's windy. Next up, we have 5, which is 457. It is a pretty straightforward hole, but a very narrow driving area, so it does put a lot of reliance on that off the tee. If you can hit the fairway, it is a pretty straightforward hole, but a lot of people are missing the fairway, making this a lot harder than it looks like on paper. 6 is 562, so it is a short par 5. This is one of the few holes that you pretty much have to be making birdie on. If you miss the fairway, it's going to be far from a gimme, but if you do hit the short stuff, the birdie rate's probably going to be 80 to 90% at 6. 7 is 465. This is a longer par 4, a little bit of shaping from left to right, so it does command a little bit of a fade off the tee for right-handers. The green's also a bit larger than some of the other ones on property, but it does have a significant ridge right about where this cursor is that splits it in half. So it's almost like there's 2 separate greens there at 7, and back right pin locations on top of that slope are by far the most difficult. Next up, we have 8, which is 177. This is a shorter par 3, at least for the standards of this course, but just like a lot of the other ones, it is a very narrow landing area, making distance control of the utmost importance. Next up, we have 9, which is a longer par 5, not reachable in 2 for the entire field. It does play slightly downhill and sometimes downwind, so if you end up catching it on a downwind day, most of your players can get close to the green in 2, but other than that, it's mostly only your bombers that are going to be trying to do that sort of thing. Next up, we have 10, which is 457, mid-length par 4, and one where a lot of people take less than driver because of this bunker up here. If you take less than driver, it takes that out of play, and it really makes this fairway wider, whereas if you take driver, you're playing towards the very narrow portion of it, so it's more of a positional hole, and a lot of it comes down to pin with how attackable it is. If it's on one of the top little shelves like you have in this very back left or back right, it'll be a run-of-the-mill hole at this sort of course. If you put it in one of the low areas, then it'll probably be in the top 6 easiest holes that you have on the course. 11's 225. This is a longer par 3. Back right pin location to this hole is absolutely brutal. Even a back left can be pretty difficult too, as it's on top of a shelf. And because of the 4-inch rough, a lot of people say that back left pin will short side themselves toward the left side, and it's hard to even hit the green because of the elevated factor and that 4-inch Kikuyu grass being so sticky. So this is a hole that'll be in the top 6 most difficult holes pretty much no matter what, but a back left or a back right pin location, and it'll be in the top 3 to 4 most difficult holes there. 12 is 506, one of the longest holes that you have on this golf course. The back 9, by the way, if you're starting on that side, good luck. It's even harder than what you have on the front. If this plays to a back left or a back right pin location, it'll be on this top 6 most difficult holes as well. 13 is a par 5. It is a brute of one, though, at 624 yards. It plays a little bit downhill for your first shot. The second shot, even though there is a valley in the middle, about a 10-yard, even 15-yard valley down to this cursor, it comes right back up for your second shot. So it's pretty flat overall, the whole topography, even though there are some humps and hollows in between. and one where if it's downwind, maybe players can try and get it close to the green in 2, but for the vast majority of the field, it is a 3-shotter, especially if you miss the fairway. You have no chance at getting there in 2 then. 14 is 437. This is a shorter par 4, and this one's really pin location dependent. About where this cursor is, actually, there's a little bit of a slope that bisects it from left to right. The slope goes from the right side down to the left. So right side pin locations with that very narrow portion of the green are the hardest that you have at 14. Whereas anything in that low area is actually pretty accessible. So back left would be your second hardest pin, back right the hardest pin location. Anything in between will actually be pretty scoreable. 15 is 518, so another long par 4. This one does have a pretty wide landing area, though. You do have some out of bounds way over here towards the left, about where my cursor is now, but you do have a ton of room towards the right to use. If you bail out over there, it is going to be a long shot in, but because you do have some fairway to run up shots, this is a difficult hole, especially in the back right pin location. It also has a slope that bisects the screen, which makes it play even smaller and almost like 2 smaller separate greens because of that. Front pin locations, though, will be in maybe the top 5 or 6 most difficult holes, but probably not 1 or 2 to one of those front pin locations. Backside, maybe not so much. 16 is a long par 3. This is the hardest par 3 when it's played to the back left pin location. Back left pin is not only protected by these bunkers, but also slopes that try and take your ball further away. In a long iron shot, which plays sometimes into the prevailing wind, is always going to be really tricky. 17 is 443, so it is a middle length par 4, but everything slopes from right to left, so even if you land it at about this marker, you might end up in the rough on the left side, which means the bailout's towards the right, and if you hit it in the bunkers, it might not be an impossible shot, but out of that rough, that 4-inch, 5-inch Kikuya that it'll be by the end of the week, good luck trying to get it on that green complex. So then you finish up at 18, which is a reachable par 5. They finally give you a birdie look on the last hole. And if you hit the short stuff, everyone's going to be trying to get it at least near the green in 2, if not onto the surface. But there is some water towards the front left, which does further complicate that decision. And then the pin location at 18 is massive because you've got like 4 slopes on 18. You've almost got it in like a window pane sort of fashion where there's the one right down the middle that splits it from left to right. It does go from a high spot on the top left to the bottom right is the low spot. And then you also have a slope from the very back to the front, from the high spot in the back to the low spot in the front. So if you have pin locations that are just on top of those slopes, they are extremely difficult as you have to have perfect distance control to get close to them. Whereas, for example, if it's on this bottom left over here or this bottom right on the very front right of the green, you've got slopes helping you get close to those pin locations. So 18, a great finishing hole, one where you have that risk and reward because of that water, and then a green complex that really steals the show as well. And I think this is a great example of why Torrey Pines is a major championship venue, why it gets so much national acclaim. Is because it gives you so many different options with the setup. Like you throw one into the top right, this could be a tough finishing hole. You throw it down there into the bottom left, and you could get some eagles to try and finish off this golf tournament. So with that in mind, what plays well from the modeling standpoint? And what we're going to look at here is going to be bet the number models for this week. This isn't necessarily going to be my modeling. I will likely make some adjustments to the bet the number model before I go out there and run it myself. But because they work with tour players, they have so much experience on these golf courses, I always want to pick their brains and see where they're looking at for these golf events. So the first thing they have on there would be shots gained ball striking, and I think that is the perfect way to start this sort of event. This is a ball striking fest, especially at the harder of the 2 golf courses. Pretty much every time you miss a fairway, that's almost a half a stroke penalty. Every time you miss a green, it's a half a stroke penalty with that around the green there. So guys like Erasmus Niergaard Peterson, Eriko Hoey, Siwoo Kim, and Aaron Rai, a Marco Penge that really excel in those categories are players that are going to be able to separate from the field. So I think that's a good starting point that does incorporate a regular shots gained off the tee form and shots gained approach, which is always in our modeling to begin with. So whether you want to do it individually, that's likely how I'll do it in my modeling with your shots gained off the tee form and shots gained approach, or with this ball striking, all of that's going to be extremely useful. And number 2 key stat on here would be a carry distance. That's trying to find the guys that have the most power off the tee. I mean, Aldrich Potgieter, he's had a lot of success at this course the second time he played it last year with that carry distance, but guys like a Goran Sargent, Erasmus Højgaard, a Jesper Svensson, and Nikolai Højgaard, the other twin there, but all of these players that are heavily into the dark green with their carry distance, when they miss, are going to be in a better position compared to the rest of the field. And because the fairway percentage is only about 52%, well below the PGA Tour average, these players are going to be at the advantage this week. And that's why when you're looking at the Bombers Paradise metric before, I was a bit surprised because this is known as a Bombers Fest. This is known as a course, at least if you're just looking at the main track this week, where driving distance is really going to be useful. Maybe not so much as the easier track. Maybe that's why it's only at a 5 out of 10. But when we're modeling for the track that we're using for 3 of the 4 rounds, carry distance, driving distance, off the tee, all of that is going to be a big part of what I'm looking at. So this will be in there. I'll likely have some driving distance stats on top of the carry distance there. And we'll talk about some apex height a little bit later too. But on the approach metrics, we do have the ball striking in there, but you can look at approach from 175 to 275 as well. The closer to 275 shots are going to be your par 5s, but those are going to be some of your key separators with how hard the scoring is. And because the birdie average is likely only going to be about 3 birdies or better per round, and you do have the 4 par 5s to attack, over half your birdie production is going to come on those holes. So getting players that have the distance and have that ability to attack with their second shots is something that you might want to explore there. So, we got some small sample size guys towards the top, like a Chandler Blanchett, a John Vanderlong, but players that we've seen a little bit more often on tour, like a Rico Hoey, are perhaps worth a few extra looks. You got a lot of small sample guys like from the Korn Ferry and Dow, DP World Tour on a Nakajima there too. But a Siwoo Kim, a Neil Shipley, an Austin Eckroat, a Kevin Yu that we routinely see on the PGA Tour are all better than their peers in that category. And I mentioned the apex height because it could be a slightly firmer and faster year on the greens at Torrey Pines. I want guys with apex height as well, and that is an off the tee stat, but we're mostly looking at it on approach. The guys that hit the ball high off the tee for the most part can also hit the ball high on approach. And Jason Day, part of the reason he's had so much success at this course over the years is because he can launch the ball high and get close to some of those really tucked pin locations that you can't get to if you don't have that apex height. So we've got the approach from 175 to 275 on there. A lot of these guys correlate to a higher apex height, but if you want to add that on top of that, that's something that I'll be doing in my personal modeling. I'm also looking at around the green because you're going to be penalized so much around the green. This is a category to look at. By the way, I'm wearing the Jason Day shirt that he had on Sunday at the Amex win-off, shoot -8, nearly got into contention at that event. You can see number 1 in the shots gained around the green, so I'm going to not rock the shirt quite as well as a Jason Day, but he certainly rocks the course fit around this golf course well. You also got guys like a Keegan Bradley that have played well here in the past, but a Marco Penge, this is going to be somebody that I'm really keeping an eye on this week because he's an off-the-tee bomber. He's an absolute striper from the DP World Tour, and he's really good around the green. Historically, a lot of these guys have found success. Putnam's really good, but he's not a very good off-the-tee player, so it's kind of the opposite of a Marco Penge. But Hideki Matsuyama, an intriguing course fit, really good around the green, and we know the kind of ball striking that he brings to the table. Rasmus Niergaard Peterson, haven't seen a Steven Yeager in a long time out here, but this is the kind of golf course where he can find some success. So there's a couple other metrics to throw into your modeling. You've also got putting on POA from 4 to 12 feet. That, of course, is the type of agronomy that they'll be putting on. And this isn't the kind of course where we're looking at that 5 to 20 feet putting like we had at the Amex. This 4 to 12 foot range is when you're on the par 5s, maybe trying to make birdie there, but a lot of par putts that you're going to see on this POA surface. So that's why we've adjusted the range a little bit more based on the style of golf that these guys are going to be playing. And people like a Pavon, who's found a lot of success at this golf course in the past, a winner, could be an obvious choice for that sort of a thing. But a Johnny Kiefer in his small sample on tour has also found a lot of success there. And Luke List, and I think this category might just be the absolute nuts. Because if you look at the top 3, you've got 2 winners at this golf course that have rated extremely well in this category. You got Kiefer there, then look at Luke List. One of the worst putters, by the way, on all the PGA Tour, but he does putt a lot better on POA than he does on the other surfaces, is really good from 4 to 12 feet on this sort of a surface. So I'll be deep diving some Kiefer for sure. He's another bomber off the tee that might really fit this golf course. But your Justin Hastings, I know it's a small sample size guy, but maybe worth at least a look or two. But like your Spahns, your Bazanehoots, your Akshays, your Harris Englishes, by the way, who won this event, won at this golf course last year, are going to be worthy of a few extra looks. So in this top 10, we've got 3 past champions that really aren't checking the other boxes, but are checking this one. Some of these other names here, like an Akshay, a Spahn, a Seabez, a Kiefer, are definitely going to be deep dived a few extra times this week. You can also look at the bogey rate. So this, because it is a slightly more difficult golf course, Guys that make the least amount of bogeys on tour could be looked at. You can look at bogey avoidance, bogeys per round, however you want to do it. Avoiding the death by 1,000 paper cuts is a good idea. Now, some of the guys you see towards the top here are playing on the fall swing and playing at some of the easier events. So I do think you want to maybe go with a slightly longer sample size when looking at that category. Par 5 scoring, though, you mentioned the importance of making birdies on those holes, as they are by far the most scoreable on property. So if you want to take a look at some of the best players in that category, I think it makes a lot of sense. A Xander, a Meissner, a Jake Knapp, a Dow, a Pearson, Cootie rounding off the top 5. And then if you want to look at the 3-putt percentage, minimizing that on really tricky fast greens. They're not big greens, they're only 5,000 square foot, but when you are putting from over 25 feet, they are difficult to get down into. Could also be a bit of an X factor to consider. But when we put it all together, you guys can find the top 10 in the modeling towards the left. Number 1, a Chris Gotterup coming in off a win, a Pearson Cootie, another striper of the golf ball, people that are towards the top end of the ball striking metrics as well. A lot of bombers, a lot of high birdie percentage, good par 5 scores that I was expecting to see on here. And that's despite me not agreeing with every single category that we had here at the BTN model. So this is looking like what I'm hoping to find when I run my modeling a little bit later on. So after making some adjustments for the apex height, maybe some driving distance on there, a few maybe like bogey avoidance stats that I'm adding on top of this, I'm imagining that it's going to look pretty similar to this top 10, maybe just slightly misarranged and mixed around a little bit. But that's what we're looking at in our plays this week. In terms of comp courses, I've got 3 that really make sense, and we're looking for hard par 72s. That is the main determining factor that we're going to have here. So looking at Quail Hollow Club, it's a long 7,600 yard golf course. Par 71 was played as the PGA Championship last year, but the Wells Fargo before that. So if you want to take a look at some of those leaderboards, I think that would make sense. You can look at the API, another long par 72, different agronomy, but at 7,500 yards and a winning score at -10 or better. A lot of times that's something you want to look at. And by better, I mean closer to par. So it's one of the harder tracks that we have on tour. And then if you want to look at Muirfield Village, that's also the home of the Memorial Tournament. That's a Jack Nicklaus design, 7,600 yard par 72. Another winning score that's usually in the single digits, and that you could use for some of that crossover. But that's what we're looking for in our plays to hopefully cash out for DFS and for props. Alrighty guys, that is all I've got for the course breakdown this week. Smash that like button if you guys haven't already. Also go ahead and subscribe to the channel so you guys don't miss any of the content to come. Our DFS and betting preview will be dropping on a little bit later on this evening, so make sure to stay tuned for that, for all of my exposure that I'll be getting to this week, and for an idea of the thought process and research process to get to some of your plays yourself. But until then, that's all I've got. I appreciate all of your support here on the channel. Go ahead and comment down below what you've got is the winning score for this week. And if you end up getting that winning score correct, you'll win a free month access to everything I have on my Patreon page, and that includes all my DFS projections, my spreadsheets for showdown and rounds 2 through 4, also all the prop and betting content that I put out there as well. All yours for free as long as you get that correct winning score first. So it'll be on a first come first serve basis. Go ahead and claim your score before anyone else ends up stealing them from you. Best of luck with the giveaway, also with anything you're going with from the exposure standpoint. I'll see you guys a little bit later on this evening for that betting and DFS preview.